Hello everyone, I'm the storyteller, and I'm here to accompany you today. I know you're watching this video to relax or help you sleep. So first, please like and subscribe. Where are you from? What time is it? Relax, unwind, and enjoy the moment. A dead man murdered my friends. I'm posting this personal account as both a warning to all and to honor my friends. I want people to hear the truth about what happened, even if no one believes me. I live in a rural part of Eastern Europe. I won't tell you exactly where because I don't want anyone to find this place. Mostly the area I live in consists of small farming villages and vast open fields where shepherds and farmers tend to their flocks. The land is beautiful in a quiet, understated way. It's peaceful and unchanging, and time seems to pass without hurry. It's a place an artist could use as inspiration, or a monk could come for prayer and meditation. But to people like my friends and I, it is supremely dull. If you've seen one farm, you've seen them all. And I had no intention of drinking myself to death, like so many here do, just to escape the monotony. Caitlin, Johan, and I met on an online forum. After chatting for a bit, we realized we were all relatively close to each other and bonded over our shared experience with life in our part of the world. What started as casual conversations soon became something I looked forward to, and we quickly became good friends. Over the course of a year, we met in person several times. Johan lived in the city about 2 hours away from my town, and Caitlin lived in a smaller village in between us. I had a car, so it made sense that I would pick up Caitlin, and we'd go up together to spend the occasional weekend with Johan. Caitlin was a good person, better than Johan and I put together. She was the daughter of the town's priest, always scolding us for our not-so-righteous habits. Johan, on the other hand, was the life of the party. His world revolved around clubbing, drinking, smoking, and sleeping. As for me, I was the most boring of all. My focus in recent months had shifted to working hard to contribute to my sister's college fund, leaving little room for much else. During our time in the city, we would sightsee the various museums and attractions the city offered. Johan even convinced Caitlin and I to join him in his escapades once. At least he had fun. But eventually, even Johan's big city became utterly boring to us. What had once been an exciting new opportunity to explore had become yet another routine of the same people and places. We needed something new, something that could give us the thrill and novelty we were all craving. I'm still surprised that the idea came from Caitlin. Maybe Johan had rubbed off on her a bit. Urban exploration, sneaking into abandoned buildings, forgotten places, and secret spots tucked away from the world. We discussed it in our group chat over the week. Johan was on board immediately, unlike me. The thrill of exploring forgotten places was alluring to me too, but it seemed dangerous to me. On top of that, it felt like there was no reward for this danger. Still, we had nothing else to do, and my two friends promised we wouldn't go anywhere dangerous, only nearby places, and we'd always let someone know before we went. Honestly, Caitlin being for it is what convinced me. I guess I had her on a pedestal in my head, like she couldn't be wrong. I was under the impression we'd just be wandering into some old houses like a group of looters, and at first, I was right. We started off small, a dilapidated old 2-story house at the edge of my town. It wasn't big, maybe 950 square feet, and it had been abandoned sometime during the mid-1900s. We found old photos of people who, I'm assuming, lived here. A tall man with a black beard and a woman with dark hair. They looked happy. Johan found a pocket watch in one of the drawers and put it in his bag. Caitlin scolded him for stealing, but he argued, "It's not stealing if it doesn't belong to anyone. Besides, it'll do me more good than if we just left it to rust." Inwardly, I agreed with Caitlin, but not enough to press the issue. It was just an old watch after all. I think that first house only grew our need to quell boredom. Each trip was different from the last, and each had its own mystery and surprises to it. It was the perfect hobby for us. We stuck to easy stuff for a while, mostly abandoned old houses, but eventually we aimed a bit higher. First, it was an old motel, then an apartment complex, then an empty hospital. They were relatively easy to find. There are plenty of old Soviet structures that haven't been used or lived in for a long time. We'd all search for new spots on forums and online during the week, and decide where we wanted to go by the weekend. That's how we found the train station. I was actually the one who found out about it through an old online friend of mine. It was a subway from the Soviet era that hadn't been used since the 80s. It may not have been the flashiest structure we'd explored, but it was the most enticing. Long tunnels with dozens of rooms sprouting off of them like leaves from a vine. The possibilities were endless. I sent a message to our group chat, and the two of them were on board with me. The plan was, as usual, for me to pick up Catelyn on the way to Johan's. From there, it was about a 45-minute drive eastward. Leaving the city, the setting once again became the familiar farmland that Catelyn and I knew so well. It only spurred us forward more eagerly to escape our boredom. We were like giddy children on Christmas morning the whole way there. It was pretty easy to find. Nothing else was nearby. I pulled off of the road and parked on a flat stretch of dirt. Opposite us was a cracked, neglected sidewalk leading to the entrance. A concrete welcome mat, pointing us to the open maw of the subway system below. It was a pool of darkness, a thick wall of black separating the world from the things below. We had come prepared, like we always did. We brought flashlights, a first aid kit, water, and snacks. I was hesitant at first. The dark passage seemed ominous, almost threatening, for a reason I couldn't quite explain. My friends didn't seem to share my anxieties, and they eagerly went down the stairs together. I didn't want to spoil the fun with my nerves, so I followed suit. My fingers trailed along the walls of old, dusty tile and brick until they opened up to reveal a massive cavern at the bottom of the steps. The station stretched before me, a long, empty chamber split down the middle by the tracks where trains once ran. Platforms flanked either side, their edges lined with towering support pillars that cast long shadows from our flashlights. Broken light fixtures dangled from the ceiling, and the sound of dripping water echoed throughout the room from multiple places. Exciting as it was, we didn't find anything that we didn't expect. Catelyn and I each studied the walls of the room, reading over the graffiti that decorated them. Johann was walking along the tracks. It was a strange sight, something I had only ever seen in movies. Moss and roots were creeping into the station from above, like skin regrowing over a wound, reclaiming the space 1 centimeter at a time. Our exploration of the main room didn't yield much, just a few waterlogged books, some decaying papers, and a couple of rotten wooden benches. I could feel the weight of disappointment on my friends, and honestly, I felt it too. After all the planning and anticipation, we had found nothing but moss and old debris. That's when I spoke up. Well, this is just the main room. There's still more. Remember the pictures in the forum? The tracks go on for miles. We've only seen a fraction of it. I wanted to lift their spirits, to keep the sense of excitement alive so that we hadn't wasted a weekend. Johann didn't seem to hear me at first, lost in his thoughts, but after a long moment, he glanced back, his eyes glimmering with that familiar spark. Yeah, you're right. Let's see what else is down here. Catelyn just nodded, the faintest trace of a smile playing on her lips. She had been fiddling with her necklace, a nervous tic I had picked up on over the years. If there's more, I'll follow. Just, let's be careful. The mood shifted a bit, the excitement coming back in small doses. But it was clear we all wanted something more than what we had found. We weren't about to give up just yet. And so, we each jumped down onto the tracks, following Johann. Lights pointed straight ahead. We wandered into the tunnel that led away from the main room. At first, it was just more of the same. Graffiti, dust, and puddles of runoff water. We kept walking for a few minutes, and the walls started to change. The graffiti grew sparse, as if the artists had stopped midway, or simply didn't bother to go further in. Eventually, it stopped altogether, leaving only bare stone and rusted pipes. Catelyn let out a short yelp as her foot stepped onto something with a crunch. We shined our lights at her foot. She had stepped on a bone. We all laughed in relief. It was only a dead rat, but by her foot I noticed something else gleaming in the beam of our flashlights. I picked it up off the ground. It was a ring, old and caked in grime, but unmistakably made of gold. "Hey, check this out," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. Johann snatched it from my fingers and held it up to his eyes. "Look at it, it's gold." Catelyn now wore a wide grin. she spoke up. Maybe someone dropped it during the last days of the subway. Or maybe it's from someone important. You know, like a soldier or an official. How much do you think it's worth? I asked, admittedly with a hint of greed in my voice. Johann answered, rolling the ring between his fingers. At least a couple hundred, maybe more. Who knows? Catelyn chimed in gingerly. Maybe we could return it to someone. If it's a wedding ring, I'm sure someone is missing it. Johann scoffed with a dismissive tone. Return it? Seriously? It's probably been down here for years. If anyone's looking for it, they either died of old age or gave up by now. Catelyn hesitated before speaking her mind, as if she felt foolish for her suggestion. I don't know. It just doesn't feel right, you know? Like, it's got history. Someone cared about it. Johann shrugged. Maybe. Or maybe it's just some old junk that got lost down here. Look, we don't even know whose it is. And besides, it's valuable. It's ours now. Free treasure. With that, Johann slipped it into his pocket. I was just happy that the discovery had brought the feeling of giddiness back. I felt like a kid exploring an amusement park with my friends again. With refreshed vigor, we continued down the dark tunnel. As we went, we began to notice an increasing amount of remains. Nothing particularly concerning, they looked like rodent bones. We figured that the subway was infested with rats, so it was normal to expect dead ones. All three of us stopped in our tracks at the same time. An open door stood to our right. We had passed a few doorways branching off the tunnel in the walk up until now, some open like this one. I had assumed they were just maintenance rooms or something. What stopped us was the horrid stench of death and decay wafting from the other side. The darkness encircled by the doorway was so thick I almost doubted our lights could cut through it. I'm not ashamed to admit I was afraid at this point. The entire setting had been creepy, and this smell was too much for just a few dead rodents. We're not going in there, right? I asked nervously. Johann backed me up, shaking his head. No way. Let's just keep on down the tunnel. There's a better chance to find stuff here anyway. But Catelyn stopped us. Wait. Listen. We did as she said, and my ears perked up as a subtle breeze hit me from the door. I could barely hear it. It was so faint I thought I was imagining it. Then I caught it. A quiet mumbling coming from the thick veil of darkness. Johann's face had become pale. Apparently he had heard it too. We should leave, he urged, his voice shaky. Catelyn's resolve hardened. They could be hurt. What if they need our help? I stayed silent. I trusted Catelyn, but my gut was telling me not to set foot into that room. Seeing the uncertainty in our faces, Catelyn made a sudden decision. Without waiting for our agreement, she stepped into the darkness. Johann and I both let out a groan of frustration. She knew we would follow her in. And we did. Jog-walking to catch up with her, we entered the room. It was another long hallway-esque room, though narrower and shorter than the one we had just left. Piles of bones littered the floor to the point where it was impossible to avoid stepping on them. I wasn't sure about these. They seemed bigger than the ones from earlier. I could recognize a few of them, mostly skulls of goats and other livestock. I wanted to argue with Catelyn, but I knew it was pointless. Once she had her mind set on something, it was impossible to convince her otherwise. The voice had stopped by now, but I knew Catelyn would see this through regardless. Johann didn't share my temperament. With a hushed but desperate voice, he pleaded, "Come on, it was nothing. Let's just turn around, okay?" His words fell silent, and we came to a halt. The light from mine and Catelyn's flashlights had fallen on a strange structure in the center of the room. It was a rectangular box that came up to about waist height. It looked to be made crudely out of stone and wood. The top of the box was a mesh of what looked like bars made up from piping. At each of the four corners on the top of the box stood a small, sharp protrusion, almost like a horn. On the floor in front of the structure was a large metal bowl. It too was stained reddish-brown. Lastly, a simple rusty knife rested on the frame of the structure. Standing this deep in the room, the stench had grown worse. I could identify the smell of rot and ash mixed together with a stale metallic scent. The bones near the box were charred and black. We approached the structure together, curiosity briefly triumphing over our anxiety. I could see through the metallic grate of the top. A layer of ash and dust covered the bottom, resting underneath what appeared to be fresh firewood. Reddish-brown stains adorned the inside of the horns, as well as the base and top of the structure. Its walls were lined with crude carvings that I didn't recognize, ancient-looking patterns and symbols. I saw Catelyn's eyes widen when she studied them. Before I could inquire, Johann gagged, "Oh shit!" His light was pointing ahead, past the structure to the wall behind it. There, slumped against the wall, was a corpse. It looked ancient, its skin thin and dry, pulled tight against the bones, like it had been lying here for centuries. The face, though faded, still held traces of features of a man. But one thing stood out to me in particular. There was a mark on its arm that didn't seem as decayed as the rest of it. In fact, it looked like a fresh craving or a tattoo. I don't really know how to describe the marking to you, other than it looked like a symbol from an old language I didn't recognize. I stammered, "What the hell is that?" Johann ignored my question. "We need to get out of here and call the cops." Catelyn was staring at the markings on the corpse's arm. I could see the cogs in her head turning, like she recognized them, but couldn't quite place from where. I pressed her. "Cat, what is that?" I'm not sure. It looks familiar. I've seen it before somewhere." We were silent for a moment, letting her think. I knew Johann was making sense and wanting to leave, but a part of me wanted to stay. Wasn't this hobby all about exploring and excitement to begin with? Why should we turn tail at the greatest mystery we had found so far? I wanted to know more. Our silence was interrupted by a sound, a steady pattern of quiet wheezes. That's when I noticed it. We had been so transfixed on the marking on its forearm that we hadn't paid attention to the whole corpse. Its chest was rising and falling in a fixed pattern. It was breathing. Johann swore under his breath and stumbled back, nearly tripping over the uneven floor. My stomach twisted into a knot. "Holy shit," I whispered. "It's alive." Catelyn took a step closer. No, that's not possible." But even as she said it, her voice wavered. The breathing was shallow, barely noticeable, but now that I had seen it, I couldn't unsee it. The corpse, if it even was a corpse, wasn't as lifeless as we had thought. Johann shook his head furiously. "I don't care what it is. We're leaving. Now." He grabbed both of our arms and began to drag us out when we were again interrupted. It spoke. A dry, rasping whisper filled the room, like wind scraping against stone. It was the same incoherent mumbling we had heard before. Catelyn leaned closer, her ears straining to make out the words. It was just barely loud enough for me to hear. "The blood cries out. The ground remembers." Catelyn went to the corpse and knelt beside it. "We can help you. We can get you to a hospital." I admire her bravery. There are many compliments I would give her. But above all, she valued the lives of others above her own, even going so far as to risk herself for this withered thing we had stumbled across. The corpse didn't really seem to notice her at all. It continued on with its fervent whispers. "Hidden from his presence, restless wanderer." The events that followed this point will be difficult for me to describe with complete accuracy. It happened quickly and it is painful for me to remember, but I will do my best. I think what caused it was our lights. You see, Catelyn was leaning over in an attempt to help the man we had found. In doing so, her necklace had fallen out past the collar of her shirt and was dangling freely in the air. Johann and I were still shining our flashlights at it. This caused the crucifix at the end of the necklace to shine, catching the attention of the corpse. I saw its eyes, shriveled like dried-out grapes, shift to it. Its mumbling stopped, hushed by a sudden raspy inhale. It grabbed Catelyn by the hair, yanking her back as she screamed. Johann and I both rushed to help her, the light from our flashlights moving erratically in our panic. Johann grabbed it by its shoulder in an attempt to pull it off of Catelyn. In one swift motion, it snatched something from the ground, a sharp bone, or maybe an old knife, and drove it deep into his thigh. He let out a strangled cry of pain. It stood up from the wall, with snapping limbs and cracking bones, its grip on Catelyn still like iron. One swing of its shriveled arm sent him to his back. He hit the ground with a hard thud and didn't get back up. I tried to help Catelyn too. Copying its idea, I grabbed a rib bone from the floor and planted it firmly into its side. The bone pierced the corpse's rotted flesh with a sound like stabbing a canvas, but it didn't so much as flinch. I hadn't seen the stone in its hand. It must have grabbed it before standing. It raised its hand and brought the rock onto my skull with the force of a hammer. My vision went white for several moments. When I regained it, the world was horizontal. I was on my side on the floor facing the rectangular structure. I willed my limbs to move, but my body wouldn't cooperate. I was concussed and dazed. The corpse dragged Catelyn, kicking and fighting, to the structure, where it forced her to her knees. It rested its palm on her head and shut its withered eyes. Catelyn's eyes widened in what looked to me like both realization and horror. She pleaded with it. "No, you can't. It won't work." But her begging was cut short. The corpse picked up the knife from the top of the structure and slit Catelyn's throat before I had recovered enough to even stand. It leaned her head over the bowl on the floor, collecting her blood. I wanted to scream, cry, beg for this all to be just a nightmare, but I knew it wasn't. I had led my friends into a living hell. Still struggling to push the fog out of my head, I forced myself to my feet. The corpse paid me no mind. It had already set fire to the wood within the structure. I didn't, and still do not understand its actions. It took the bowl of Catelyn's blood and sprinkled it onto the four horns of the box with its leathery fingers. It proceeded to set the body of my friend on top of the box, cremating her. I stumbled to Johann, who was still on the floor. I heard him groan and pulled at his arm. "We need to go. We need to run. Now, get up." I succeeded in pulling him up, and you wrapped his arm over my shoulder to support him. I glanced back before I left. It was kneeling in front of the fire, its arms open to the ceiling above and its face pointing up. It's like it was waiting for something to happen, like it was praying for something. I'm not sure. When nothing did happen, it began to shake. It let out a butter shriek and curled into a ball before the flames. An inhuman wail of agony and despair echoed throughout the entire subway system. Still on its knees, it snapped its spine around to face us. Then, it let out another noise, this time one of pure, unmistakable rage. I practically dragged Johann out of the room. He had recovered enough by now to at least somewhat assist me in our escape. We made it out of the offshoot room and slammed the door behind us. I jammed my flashlight into the handle in an attempt to barricade the monster inside. Still, I knew that would only buy us a little bit of time. We stumbled down the long tunnel from where we had come for only a few seconds before I heard pounding on the door. It sped us up, fueling us with adrenaline and fear. After we had gone maybe 70 meters down the tunnel, I heard a loud bang from behind us. I knew what it was, and so did Johann. As we limped on, I could hear uneven footsteps behind us. It was close. We made it to the main station. I could see the staircase, our doorway to safety. But we still needed to throw ourselves over the high ledge onto the platform, and the footsteps were so close now. I pulled myself up and got to my feet, reaching down to pull the injured Johann up. He grabbed my hand and I pulled. Johann was a big man, and I am not that strong, not to mention the concussion and Johann's stabbed leg. Saying these things now, they feel like excuses. The corpse emerged from the dark tunnel, dragging itself in a crooked sprint towards us. It had picked up another stone, larger than the one it used on me. I pulled with all my strength, but I couldn't save him. It tackled Johann to the floor, pinning him down by the waist. It lifted the stone with both hands above its head and brought it down onto Johann's face with force. It beat my friend to death with a stone, and I knew I couldn't stop it. In my cowardice, I fled. I ran up the stairs and into the light of day. I didn't stop until I was in my car. I peeled onto the road and pressed the pedal to the floor. In my rearview mirror, I saw the corpse run out of the subway after me. It was covered in blood, the blood of my friends. As it shrunk in my mirror behind me, I could hear one last wail of anger and sorrow. I didn't stop until I reached home, about 3 hours away. I locked my doors, shut my curtains, and hid in my room. I felt as if it would find me, like I'd hear that awful mumbling again, like it would break down my door like it had in the tunnel, but it never did. 3 days went by and nothing happened. I called the police and reported what had happened. They searched the subway and found nothing. I'm not honestly surprised. That place is a labyrinth. If something didn't want to be found down there, it likely wouldn't be. In the end, my statements were discredited. I was questioned for the disappearance of Johann and Catlin, but there was nothing that could incriminate me. They concluded that the two of them had simply gone missing during one of our urban explorations. But I know the truth. They didn't get lost or go missing. They were murdered by a dead man. I had failed both of my friends and led them to their deaths. For my own sanity, I need to tell someone, even if no one believes me. I don't know what that thing is. There are stories around here. Dracula, werewolves, demons, and maybe it was something like that, I don't know. But I stabbed it deep enough to kill any man, and it didn't even notice. Whatever it is, please don't look for it. It isn't worth it. I wish I could undo the choices we made, but I can't. Don't make the same mistake we did. Don't let curiosity take you down this path. It leads only to sorrow and loss. Do what I should have done. Be happy with what you have. And that's it for today. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like it, subscribe, and leave a comment letting me know what you think. Relax, unwind, and get some sleep. See you in the next video.